Welcome back, everybody, to 31 1980s horror movies for Halloween, where I'm counting down my favorite horror movies from the 1980s. At number 18, we have one of my favorite werewolf movies of all time. Don't worry, I have another werewolf movie much higher on this list, but this one here, it is one of the greatest werewolf movies ever made, and that is An American Werewolf in London.
Hey, did you hear something?
Just now?
Yes.
No.
So, when it comes to horror fans, you have people who prefer vampire movies, you have people who prefer werewolf movies, and of course, you probably have people that like both of them. When it comes down to it, I am a werewolf guy. I have always found werewolves more fascinating than vampires. I understand the fascination with vampires, but I've always been a bigger fan of werewolves. One of the main reasons for that is I'm a fan of body horror movies, and I've always considered werewolf movies to be part of the body horror genre. Because think about it, a body horror movie is about somebody going through some kind of otherworldly transformation, and that's what werewolf movies are about. They're about people transforming into a monster, some wolf-like creature. I have mentioned this on my channel before. As much as I love American Werewolf in London, the reason it doesn't quite make my favorite werewolf movie is because it is your basic werewolf movie. It's a great basic werewolf movie. It tells the werewolf story very well, but it is a basic werewolf movie. Guy gets bitten by a werewolf, is told that they're going to become a monster, and then during the full moon, they become a monster.
You've never had bad dreams before?
Well, sure, as a kid, but never so real.
But even as a basic werewolf movie, there's no denying how great American Werewolf in London is. It is a horror comedy. There are funny parts to this movie, mostly between the banter between David and his friend Jack, even after Jack dies.
Can I have a piece of toast? Get the fuck out of here, Jack.
Now, this movie was made by John Landis, who is an American filmmaker, but it has the feeling of a quirky British movie. The comedic moments in the movie feel like they come from a quirky British comedy. When it gets to the comedy, this is one of the best horror comedies because, yeah, there are funny moments in it, but horror is the point of it. There are some funny moments in, they throw some humor in, but the main purpose of it is horror. And of course, when it comes to American Werewolf in London, the first thing that everybody brings up is the transformation sequence. This is the best werewolf transformation. I mean, there's no arguing about that, because the practical effects in it are so good. Rick Baker, the guy behind the effects work in this movie, he won an Oscar for this, and rightfully so. This was a werewolf transformation that took place in the light. You know, most of the time with practical effects, you have to light the effects properly. Sometimes it's better to put a practical effect in the shadows because it can hide the seams, it can hide some latex or some rubber. But in American Werewolf in London, this effect was done in the light, perfectly lit, and it's still very, very good. I mean, it looks like what would happen if someone were to transform into a werewolf. And it looks painful, too. I mean, you have to picture that turning into a werewolf would probably be painful, and this movie captures the pain that someone would go through when transforming into a werewolf. But as great as the transformation is, you can't ignore the rest of the movie. The characters are so great. The main character of David is so likable. He's a genuinely nice guy, and he's going through this horrible curse. His girlfriend that he meets in the movie, she's very fun and quirky. And Jack, who gets killed in the movie, the thing about him is, since he's been killed by a werewolf, he's now forced to live eternity as the undead until the werewolf curse is lifted. And the only way for the werewolf curse to be lifted is if the last werewolf dies.
Have you ever talked to a corpse? It's boring. I'm lonely. Take your life, David. Kill yourself before you kill others.
The dynamic between Jack and David is so good. These two are best friends. We got the feeling of how good friends they are at the beginning of the movie. And now we're at the point where Jack is now suffering, and the only way that Jack can be relieved of his suffering is for David to die. It's such a tragic story, and that's another thing I love about werewolf movies, is the stories are so tragic. In most werewolf movies, the person who becomes the werewolf is a victim. You know, most of the time it's someone who doesn't want to be a monster. It's not someone who wants to kill anybody, but they transform into a monster during the full moon, and they go around killing people.
Mr. Bringsley, I'm sorry. I have absolutely no idea what to say to you.
You've left my wife a widow, and my children fatherless.
And it's such a great mixture of horror, comedy, and tragedy. It's not easy to mix those three elements together. You can mix horror and tragedy together. You can mix comedy and horror together. Sometimes you can mix comedy and tragedy together, but mixing all three of those together at once and having it work is very impressive. And of course, we get some great werewolf action in this movie. I mean, it is a violent movie, but a lot of the kills are off screen, but they work very well, and I love the point of view shots of the werewolf, especially that subway scene. The train station scene. I say that the train station scene in American Werewolf in London is just as good as the transformation scene. Maybe not as impressive in a technical standpoint, you know, with practical effects, but it's still a very well done scene. American Werewolf in London may not be my absolute favorite werewolf movie, but it's still a great werewolf movie. I will never deny it. I completely understand why so many people have it as their favorite werewolf movie. I completely understand if someone would say this is their favorite horror movie. It's fun, it's tragic, it's scary. It's a perfect mix of all these elements. Tragedy, horror, comedy, great practical effects, great character development. It is a very, very well done movie. I think a werewolf movie is always good to watch around Halloween, so yeah, and I have no arguments with anybody who wants to watch American Werewolf in London this time of year. So, American Werewolf in London, one of the best werewolf movies ever made.